The quiet shock. Have you ever walked into a silence so deep that you could hear your own thoughts breathing? I'm not talking about a library. Not midnight. I mean 3 in the afternoon, in the middle of an American neighborhood where there are no motorbikes, no street vendors, no one shouting a name from one end of the block to the other. Just sunlight, a little wind, and a strange empty space. I stood there and thought, why does silence here feel so different? That question quietly opened a journey of learning English, learning how to live, and learning how to love long before I was ready for it. When I first arrived in the United States, I was sure the biggest shock would be the language. I expected to feel overwhelmed by fast speech, accents, slang. But that wasn't it. What truly hit me was the silence. At the airport, everything moved smoothly. People spoke softly, just loud enough. No shouting. No pushing. No constant background noise that my brain had always accepted as normal. My brain felt like an old radio, used to static, suddenly placed in a perfectly soundproof room. It panicked. It missed the noise. There's an interesting fact. From psychology, the human brain doesn't hate difficulty, it hates uncertainty. And American silence is a special kind of uncertainty. When there's no noise guiding you, you start wondering how to behave, when to speak, how to exist. That first night in my small apartment, there was no barking dog, no neighbor's TV, no children crying. I sat on the sofa, listening to the clock tick. And for the first time in my life, I felt exposed. Not poor. Not scared. Just emotionally uncovered. There was nothing to hide behind. And strangely, that was where my English learning truly began. Not with vocabulary lists. Not with grammar rules. But with listening. I turned on the radio. The voice was slow, clear, full of pauses. I didn't understand every word, but I felt the rhythm. Pause. Stress. Silence. That was the moment I realized English isn't just sound, it's also the space between sounds. Native speakers listen to those spaces. You might not realize it, but neuroscience explains this well. When you listen to a new language, your brain is processing massive amounts of information at once. In a noisy environment, your nervous system goes into defense mode. It gets tired. It shuts down. But in a quiet environment, your brain begins to fine-tune. It hears deeper. It separates main sounds from background sounds. Simply put, silence trains your ears. Back then, I didn't know the science. I only knew I felt lonely. And this loneliness wasn't loud like back home. It was quiet, steady, and persistent, like fog that doesn't lift. I remember standing at a bus stop on a cold day. People stood apart, at a polite distance. No one talked. No one looked at anyone else. I wanted to start a conversation, but I was afraid of breaking an invisible rule. A silly thought crossed my mind. If I speak, will I be wrong? That feeling is very similar to learning English. You know the words. You understand the idea. But you're afraid of the silence after you speak. Afraid people won't understand. Afraid you made a mistake. In American culture, silence after someone speaks is not always judgment. Sometimes, it simply means the other person is thinking. But the language learner's brain often translates that silence into, you failed. Slowly, I noticed something important. The silence outside was reflecting the silence inside me. I spoke less. But I listened more. I watched how Americans used eye contact, how they nodded, how they let a sentence land without rushing to fill the gap. At the dinner table, there wasn't always someone talking. And no one felt uncomfortable about it. The silence itself became part of the conversation. I began to bring this idea into my English practice. I stopped forcing myself to respond immediately. I allowed pauses. I listened to a sentence, let it settle, then repeated it slowly. Slow is not stupid. Slow is intentional. Once I accepted a slower pace, English started to feel friendlier. It was no longer a race. It became a walk. Here's the paradox. Silence helped me hear better, understand deeper, and eventually speak more naturally. Just like standing in a quiet room helps you. Notice your own heartbeat. In America, silence is not empty. It's a mirror. And if you're brave enough to stand in front of it long enough, you start to understand yourself, both in language and in life. Basically, that first shock of silence wasn't there to scare me. It was there to teach me how to listen. And when you learn to listen the right way, English and your heart will find their own voice. Climate shapes silence. Imagine waking up in the morning and realizing the weather itself has a personality. Not just hot or cold, not just rain or sun, but a quiet attitude that shapes how people move, speak, and even think. When I started traveling across different regions of the United States, I slowly understood something unexpected. Silence in America doesn't come from people alone. It comes from the climate. And once you notice it, you can't unhear it. Where I come from, weather is loud. Rain hits metal roofs like a drum solo. Heat brings out voices, fans, movement. Complaints, life spilling into the streets. Climate pushes people together. But in many parts of the US, climate does the opposite. It creates space, distance, quiet, and that quiet slowly teaches you a new rhythm, especially if you're learning English. My first real lesson came during a winter in the Midwest. Snow covered everything. Streets, trees, cars. Sound itself seemed wrapped in cotton. When snow falls, it absorbs noise. Footsteps soften. Engines whisper. Even conversations feel muted. I remember walking outside and feeling like the world had pressed a mute button. It wasn't sad. It wasn't peaceful either. It was focused. And my brain reacted in a strange way. With fewer sounds to process, my thoughts became louder, clearer, more demanding. Psychologists call this sensory load. When your environment is noisy, your brain is busy filtering. When it's quiet, your brain turns inward. That's why silence can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're not used to it. Especially if you're learning a new language and already spending a lot of mental energy translating, guessing, correcting yourself. Climate-driven silence removes distractions and suddenly, you're left alone with your inner voice. In English. Then came the Southwest. Dry air. Endless sky. Deserts where sound travels far but rarely has anything to travel with. People speak less there. Not because they're unfriendly, but because the environment doesn't demand constant interaction. Heat slows movement. Conversations become efficient, short, purposeful. I noticed how English sounded different here. Fewer filler words. Longer pauses. Silence wasn't awkward, it was practical. Talking too much under the sun feels like wasted energy. And then, the Pacific Northwest. Rainy, gray. Soft-spoken. The rain isn't loud. It's consistent. Gentle. Almost polite. People there seem to match it. Voices stay low. Emotions stay contained. Silence stretches, but it doesn't feel empty. It feels thoughtful. This was where I truly started to appreciate how climate trains behavior and how behavior trains language. Here's the science part, but I promise I'll keep it human. Our brains adapt to patterns. Climate creates patterns of movement, social interaction, and energy use. Over time, these patterns shape communication styles. In colder or quieter climates, people conserve energy. They speak when necessary. They pause more. In louder, hotter environments, speech fills space. Neither is better. They're just different. But if you're learning English in the US without understanding this, you might think silence means rejection, coldness, or disinterest. Most of the time, it doesn't. I remember feeling discouraged early on. I would say something in English, and the other person wouldn't respond immediately. Back home, that pause would mean confusion or disagreement. In my head, alarms went off. Did I say something wrong? Was my grammar bad? But later, I realized they were simply thinking, or waiting, or respecting the moment. Climate had taught them patience. Silence wasn't a mistake, it was part of the sentence. This realization changed how I practiced English. Instead of trying to sound energetic or constantly responsive, I matched the environment. I slowed down. I allowed pauses after questions. I stopped filling silence with unnecessary words. My listening improved almost immediately. Because when you stop talking, you start noticing intonation, breath, rhythm. You hear when a sentence is finished and when it's just resting. There's also something emotional here. Climate-based silence gives feelings room to exist without commentary. In quiet environments, emotions don't need to be explained right away. They can sit. That helped me with pronunciation too. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't performing. I was speaking when it felt right. And, oddly enough, people understood me better. One small experiment helped a lot. On quiet days, I would listen to a short English audio, just 1 or 2 minutes. Then I would sit in silence for 30 seconds. No phone. No music. Then I'd repeat what I heard. Not perfectly. Just calmly. This mirrors how the brain consolidates sound patterns. Silence acts like glue. It helps the language stick. Over time, I stopped fighting the quiet. I stopped seeing climate-induced silence as loneliness. Instead, I treated it like a teacher. A strict one. One that doesn't explain itself. But if you observe long enough, it shows you how Americans listen. How they think, how they speak, and why English here sounds the way it does. So if you ever feel like English in America feels slower, calmer, or strangely empty, look up at the sky. Feel the air. Notice the temperature. Climate isn't just weather. It's an invisible hand shaping silence. And if you learn to move with it instead of against it, your ears will open naturally. In the end, silence here isn't a lack of sound. It's a response to the environment. And once you understand that, English stops feeling cold. It starts feeling intentional. Homes without noise. There's a strange moment that happens when you close the door of an American home for the first time. The click of the lock is soft. The walls don't echo. The windows don't leak sound from the street. And suddenly, the world goes quiet, so quiet that it almost feels like the house is listening to you instead. That moment taught me something important. In America, silence doesn't just live outside. It lives inside homes too. Where I grew up, homes breathe noise. You hear neighbors coughing, children running upstairs, someone frying garlic next door. Sound passes through walls like air. Privacy is flexible. Silence is rare and temporary. But American homes are built differently, not just physically, but psychologically. Thick walls, double-glazed windows, separate rooms. Each person gets their own quiet bubble. At first, this feels like luxury. Then it starts to feel like isolation. And if you're learning English, it can feel like both a gift and a trap. My first apartment was small, clean, and unbelievably quiet. No random horns. No voices through the walls. Even the refrigerator hummed politely. The silence followed me from room to room. At night, it sat beside me. During the day, it waited. And because there was nothing else to react to, my brain reacted to itself. Every mistake I had made, that day replayed. Every English sentence I said incorrectly came back for review. Silence turned into a mirror with very good memory. There's a psychological reason for this. Our brains evolved to monitor sound as a survival tool. When the environment is quiet, the brain assumes something important might happen. So it stays alert, hyper-aware. That's why total silence can feel uncomfortable. In American homes, that alertness doesn't turn off easily, especially if you're new, alone, and operating in a second language. The quiet gives your inner critic a microphone. I remember practicing English alone in my living room. I would read a sentence out loud, then stop. The silence after my voice felt heavier than the sentence itself. It was as if the room was judging my pronunciation. Of course, it wasn't. But the lack of external feedback made every pause feel dramatic. Back home, noise would quickly swallow your mistakes. Here, silence preserved them. This is where many learners lose motivation. Not because English is hard, but because quiet homes remove distraction. You can't hide behind background noise. You hear your own hesitation. You hear your accent clearly. And that can be scary. But it can also be incredibly useful if you change how you interpret it. I started noticing how Americans use their homes. They don't fill silence by default. TV isn't always on. Music isn't constant. Silence is normal. It signals rest, focus, respect. When someone comes home, they don't automatically talk. They decompress. That taught me something powerful. Silence isn't emptiness. It's recovery time. Once I understood this, I changed how I practiced English at home. Instead of trying to recreate noisy environments, I leaned into the quiet. I spoke slowly. I allowed pauses. I listened to short audio clips and replayed them not immediately, but after a few seconds of silence. Neuroscience shows that the brain needs brief quiet periods to process sound patterns and store them in long-term memory. In other words, the silence in American homes is actually ideal for language learning. But emotionally, it still wasn't easy. Quiet homes can amplify loneliness. When there's no noise, you start missing voices, even ones that used to annoy you. I missed casual conversation. I missed background laughter. And that absence made English feel colder than it actually was. I wasn't just learning a language. I was learning how to be alone with it. Then something interesting happened. I began to notice subtle sounds. The way a sentence ends. The rise and fall of intonation in podcasts. The breath before a speaker continues. In quiet spaces, these details become visible. My listening skills sharpened, not because I worked harder, but because I stopped competing with noise. There's also a cultural layer here. American homes value personal space. Silence respects that space. No one expects you to fill it. Once I realized this, I stopped apologizing for pauses in conversation. I stopped rushing my responses. I allowed myself to think in English instead of translating at high speed. And people responded. Better. Conversations felt calmer. More balanced. One small habit changed everything for me. At home, after listening to English content, I would sit quietly and summarize it out loud slowly. Imperfectly. Then I'd stop. No correction. No replay. Just silence. That silence wasn't judgment anymore. It was closure. The brain needs endings. Silence provides them. Over time, the quiet of American homes stopped feeling like absence. It became structure. A container for thought. A safe place to practice without interruption. Yes, it can feel lonely. But loneliness and focus often share the same space. The difference is what you do inside it. So if you're sitting at home right now, practicing English, and the silence feels heavy, don't fight it. It's not trying to scare you. It's giving you room. Room to hear yourself clearly. Room to slow down. Room to grow without noise rushing you forward. In the end, American homes aren't quiet because something is missing. They're quiet because something is protected. And when you understand that, silence stops being your enemy. It becomes your training partner. Culture of distance. The first time I noticed it, it wasn't something anyone said. It was something no one did. I stepped forward to speak, then stopped because the person in front of me had taken half a step back. Not in fear. Not in anger. Just enough to restore a comfortable gap. That tiny movement explained a lot about America. Silence here is protected by distance. And distance, I slowly learned, is not rejection. It's respect. In many cultures, closeness means warmth. People stand near you. They talk over each other. Silence feels awkward, almost rude. So someone rushes to fill it. In the United States, the logic is often reversed. Giving space is a sign of politeness. Not interrupting is a form of care. And silence becomes the natural result of that invisible agreement. I won't invade your space, physically or verbally. At first, this cultural distance felt cold to me. Conversations were shorter. People waited their turn. No one jumped in to rescue a dying sentence. When I paused while speaking English, no one finished my thought for me. They waited. That wait felt endless. My brain panicked. Help me, it screamed silently. But no help came. Just quiet attention. And oddly, that was the help. There's a concept in intercultural communication called low-context culture. The US is one of them. People expect words to be clear and intentional. They don't rely heavily on shared assumptions or emotional cues. Silence in this context doesn't mean hidden meaning. It means processing time, thinking space, respect for individual boundaries. Once I understood this, silence stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like a gift. But before that realization, silence hurt. I remember group conversations where I spoke once, then stayed quiet. No one pulled me back in. No one asked follow-up questions. Back home, that would mean disinterest. In America, it often just means autonomy. You speak when you want. You don't speak when you don't. No pressure either way. The freedom was there, but I mistook it for loneliness. This misunderstanding affects many English learners. You expect encouragement. You expect someone to correct you, guide you, fill the gap. But American conversational culture often avoids unsolicited correction. Interrupting someone, even to help, is considered intrusive. So silence appears. And if you don't know the cultural rule behind it, that silence feels like judgment. Here's the psychological twist: when no one interrupts you, your brain gets full ownership of the moment. That increases self-awareness. Sometimes too much. You hear every flaw in your pronunciation. You feel every pause stretch longer than it actually is. But the listener? They're usually just waiting. Calmly. Patiently. Giving you space to finish. I tested this once. In a conversation, I deliberately slowed down. I paused after sentences. I resisted the urge to apologize or rush. And something interesting happened. The other person leaned in, not physically, but emotionally. Eye contact stayed steady. No impatience. No pressure. Silence didn't weaken the connection. It strengthened it. Distance also shows up in daily routines. Neighbors wave instead of chatting. Cashiers are friendly but efficient. Small talk exists, but it's light and optional. No one traps you in conversation. This creates a quiet social environment where words carry more weight. When someone does speak, people listen. That's why silence feels heavier here. It surrounds fewer words, making each one matter more. From a learning perspective, this is powerful. It trains you to choose words carefully, to speak with intention, to become comfortable with pauses. Research shows that allowing pauses during speech improves clarity and confidence over time. Silence gives your brain a chance to plan instead of panic. Emotionally, learning to accept cultural distance was a turning point for me. I stopped interpreting space as absence. I stopped seeing quiet as failure. I began to see it as trust. Trust that I could speak when ready. Trust that I didn't need to perform constantly to belong. And this shifted how I learned English. I stopped chasing fluency as speed. I started valuing precision. I practiced speaking slowly, with pauses, without filling silence with a or you know. The result? People understood me better. Conversations felt balanced. I wasn't fighting the culture anymore, I was moving with it. There's a quiet confidence in American communication. It doesn't rush to prove itself. It doesn't demand attention. Silence is part of its structure. Once I saw that, distance stopped feeling like a wall. It became a boundary that kept interactions clear and respectful. So if you're speaking English in America and the silence feels uncomfortable, remember this: that space isn't pushing you away. It's holding room for you. You're not being ignored. You're being given autonomy. And learning to stand comfortably in that space, without rushing, without apologizing, is a skill. One that will change not just how you speak English, but how you see yourself while speaking it. In short, American silence isn't empty. It's intentional. And when you understand the culture behind the distance, silence stops feeling like distance at all. Learning English in silence. There's a strange moment every language learner recognizes, but few talk about. You're surrounded by people, signs, voices, announcements, yet inside, everything goes quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. The kind where your English disappears the moment you need it. In America, that silence hit me harder than expected, because here, silence isn't filled for you. It waits. And when you're learning English, waiting can feel terrifying. Back home, when you struggle to speak, someone jumps in. They guess your meaning. They finish your sentence. Noise saves you. In the US, people don't interrupt. They give you space. That cultural kindness creates a silence where your brain suddenly has to work alone. No rescue. No shortcuts. Just you and your thoughts, in English, hopefully. At first, this destroyed my confidence. I knew vocabulary. I understood grammar. But when someone asked a simple question like, "How was your day?" my mind froze. Not because I didn't know the words, but because the silence after the question felt too clean, too open, like a white page demanding a perfect sentence. My brain panicked and chose the safest option, silence. This is where many learners think they're failing. But neuroscience tells a different story. When you're quiet after a question, your brain isn't empty. It's overloaded. It's searching memory, checking grammar, predicting outcomes, and managing anxiety at the same time. Silence, in this case, isn't weakness. It's processing. America unintentionally forces you into this processing mode. And while uncomfortable, it's incredibly effective. Because without constant noise, your brain starts building stronger language. Pathways. You're no longer reacting. You're constructing. I remember sitting alone at a cafe, listening instead of speaking. People around me talked slowly, clearly, with pauses. I noticed how often silence appeared in real conversations between thoughts, before responses, after jokes. Native speakers weren't afraid of it. They used it. That's when I realized fluent English isn't fast English. It's comfortable English. So I changed how I practiced. I stopped trying to sound confident. I practiced being calm. When someone spoke to me, I let myself pause. I didn't rush to reply. I let silence exist. And something surprising happened. The silence didn't grow. It shrank. Because the other person wasn't uncomfortable. Only I was. There's a psychological principle called wait time. In education, teachers who allow longer pauses after questions get better answers from students. The same applies to language learning. Silence gives your brain time to organize. In the US, that pause is socially acceptable. It's not rude. It's normal. Once I trusted that, my English became clearer. Silence also helped my listening skills more than any app ever did. When there's less background noise, your ears catch details, intonation, stress, emotion. I started hearing when a sentence was finished, and when it was just pausing. I learned that meaning often lives in tone, not words. Silence sharpened that awareness. Emotionally, though, silence can be cruel. It amplifies self-doubt. Every pause feels longer than it is. Every mistake echoes. I had days when I avoided speaking entirely because the quiet afterward felt like judgment. But slowly, I learned to separate reality from interpretation. Most people weren't judging. They were just waiting. One small habit changed everything. After conversations, instead of replaying my mistakes, I sat in silence and repeated one sentence I had said slowly, correctly. Just one. This rewired my memory. Instead of storing failure, my brain stored progress. Silence became a place of correction, not punishment. Over time, silence stopped blocking my English. It became the bridge. I spoke less, but better. I listened more and understood deeper. My confidence didn't come from speaking nonstop. It came from knowing I could sit in silence without panic. And here's the quiet truth. Learning English in America isn't about filling silence. It's about surviving it long enough to realize it's not your enemy. Silence is the training ground. The place where your brain learns to think in English instead of translating from fear. If you're struggling right now, feeling stuck, quiet, invisible, don't rush to fix it. You might be closer than you think. Your English isn't gone. It's forming. And sometimes, growth doesn't make noise. In the end, silence didn't slow my learning. It refined it. It forced me to listen, to wait, to trust myself. And once I did, English stopped hiding. It started answering back, calmly, clearly, in its own time. Love speaks softly. Love in America didn't arrive with fireworks. It came quietly, almost suspiciously quiet. No dramatic confessions. No constant messages. No loud promises. Just pauses, shared glances, and long stretches where nothing was said, but everything was understood. At first, I thought something was missing. Later, I realized something rare was happening. Love was learning how to speak softly. I met my partner in a way that felt very American, casual, unforced, unannounced. We talked, then we didn't. Silence didn't scare them. That was my first clue. In my world, silence after a conversation meant distance. Here, it meant comfort. We could sit together without filling the air, and nothing felt broken. For someone learning English, this was both relieving and terrifying. Because if love didn't rely on words, where did that leave my imperfect language? Early on, I tried to compensate. I spoke more than necessary. I over-explained. I filled pauses with extra sentences just to prove I was present. My English came out rushed, tangled, eager to be accepted. And gently, never directly, my partner slowed me down. Not with correction, but with patience. They listened. They waited. They didn't interrupt. The silence between us wasn't pressure. It was permission. There's a psychological idea called emotional attunement. It means two people are sensitive to each other's rhythms, speech, pauses, energy. In American culture, this attunement often happens through space and silence, not constant verbal reassurance. I didn't know that at the time. I only knew that the quieter I became, the closer we felt. Our conversations were simple. Short sentences. Clear questions. Long pauses. Sometimes my English failed me, and instead of pushing, I stopped. Silence took over. And instead of awkwardness, there was understanding. My partner would nod, smile, or wait. That waiting taught me more about real communication than any textbook ever had. I began to notice something fascinating. Love conversations don't follow grammar rules. They follow timing. When to speak. When not to. Silence isn't the absence of affection. It's often where affection rests. And in those quiet spaces, my English started to feel less like a performance and more like a tool. I wasn't trying to impress. I was trying to connect. Of course, it wasn't always easy. There were moments when silence felt heavy. when I wanted reassurance, clarity, words. In those moments, my old habits returned. I filled the quiet with questions, explanations, emotional noise. And sometimes, that made things worse. Not because I was wrong, but because I was speaking over the moment instead of listening to it. Slowly, I learned to ask fewer questions and make clearer statements. Instead of long explanations, I practiced simple honesty. I feel confused. Pause. I need time. Pause. English became cleaner. When emotion was allowed to breathe, silence gave feeling shape. From a language learning perspective, this was powerful. Research shows that emotional safety improves language acquisition. When you feel safe, your brain releases less stress hormone, making it easier to process and produce language. Love, quiet, patient love, created that safety for me. I made fewer mistakes not because I tried harder, but because I was calmer. There's a moment I remember clearly. We were sitting in the car, parked, not going anywhere. No music. No conversation. Just the sound of breathing and distant traffic. I wanted to say something meaningful. Something romantic. My English searched for the right sentence and found nothing. So I stayed quiet. And that was enough. No disappointment. No misunderstanding. Just shared presence. That moment changed how I understood both love and English. Not every feeling needs a sentence. Not every silence needs to be filled. Sometimes, connection deepens when words step aside. Marriage later taught me the same lesson at a deeper level. Arguments weren't loud. They were quiet, measured, full of pauses. Silence became a tool, not a weapon. We learned to stop speaking before things escalated, to let space cool emotions, to return with clearer language. My English matured inside that process. It became less reactive, more intentional. Many learners think romance requires perfect language. It doesn't. It requires timing, listening, and emotional accuracy. Silence helps with all three. It slows the moment down. Enough for truth to appear. Looking back, love didn't just improve my English. It rewired how I used it. I stopped chasing fluency as speed. I started valuing meaning. I learned that the softest conversations often carry the most weight. So if you're learning English and feel like you can't express love properly, pause. Literally. Let silence do some of the work. You might be surprised how much it already says. In America, love doesn't always speak loudly. But when it speaks softly, it teaches you how to listen. And once you learn that, both love and language begin to feel natural, unforced, unafraid, and deeply human. Marriage across cultures. Marriage didn't raise its voice when I entered it. It lowered it. What surprised me most wasn't the paperwork, the vows, or even the responsibility. It was the quiet. In an intercultural marriage in America, silence becomes a language of its own, and if you don't learn to hear it, you miss half the conversation. Before marriage, love could survive on patience and curiosity. After marriage, communication needed structure. Decisions had to be made. Emotions had to be managed. And English, my second language, became the main tool. Not dramatic English. Practical English. The kind that shows up in kitchens and cars at the end of long days. This is where silence stopped being romantic and started being educational. In my culture, marriage sounds busy. Family opinions overlap. Advice comes unsolicited. Arguments are loud, emotional, expressive. Silence usually means something is wrong. In American marriage culture, it's often the opposite. Silence can mean space, time to cool down, respect for boundaries. At first, this confused me deeply. When conflict appeared and no one raised their voice, I didn't know what to do. My instincts searched for noise, for reassurance through words. But what I found instead was stillness. That stillness triggered anxiety. My brain translated silence into danger. Are we okay? Are they upset? Did I say something wrong? But over time, I realized silence wasn't avoidance. It was regulation. American culture values emotional control. Pausing before speaking is considered mature, not cold. Silence allows feelings to settle before words are chosen. This cultural difference forced me to change how I used English. I couldn't rely on emotional tone alone. I had to be clear, direct, calm. And that's hard in a second language. When emotions rise, vocabulary shrinks, grammar collapses. Silence, strangely, saved me. It gave me time to breathe, to choose simpler sentences, to speak with intention. There's research showing that couples who pause during conflict communicate more effectively. Silence lowers physiological arousal, heart rate, stress hormones, defensive reactions. In our marriage, silence became a reset button. We would stop, sit quietly, then return to the conversation with fewer words, but more meaning. My English improved not because I practiced more, but because I learned when not to speak. One memory stands out. We disagreed about something small, money, timing, priorities. I wanted to explain everything at once. My partner stayed quiet, not ignoring me, listening, waiting. That silence felt unbearable. So I stopped talking. And in that pause, I realized what actually mattered. When I spoke again, I said one clear sentence. The argument ended there. Silence had done most of the work. Marriage also taught me the power of listening without translating. Early on, I translated everything in my head, words, emotions, intentions. That made conversations exhausting. Silence gave me permission to stop translating and just listen. To tone, to pacing, to what wasn't said. Over time, this reduced misunderstandings. English became less about accuracy and more about alignment. Cultural differences show up in expectations too. In American marriages, independence is valued. You don't narrate every thought. You don't seek constant verbal affirmation. Silence supports autonomy. This was hard for me at first. I mistook independence for distance. But slowly, I learned that trust often sounds like quiet. From a language learning perspective, marriage provided constant, low-pressure exposure. Daily conversations. Repeated vocabulary. Real emotions. Silence made those conversations sustainable. Without it, everything would have been overwhelming. Silence spaced learning out. It prevented burnout. I also learned that arguments don't need volume to be valid. They need clarity. Silence helps you strip language down to essentials. When you remove emotional noise, the core message becomes visible. This made my English sharper, more efficient, less dramatic, more effective. And something unexpected happened. As I became more comfortable with silence, my confidence grew. I no longer feared pauses. I no longer rushed to explain myself. I trusted that if something needed to be said, I could say it clearly, calmly, in English. Marriage didn't demand perfect language. It demanded presence. Silence allowed that presence to exist without pressure. It created space for mistakes, for learning, for growth, both emotional and linguistic. So if you're in an intercultural relationship and struggling with communication, don't panic when things go quiet. That quiet might be doing more work than words ever could. Let silence slow you down. Let it help you choose better language. Let it teach you that understanding doesn't always arrive loudly. In the end, marriage across cultures taught me that love isn't proven by how much you say. It's revealed by how well you listen. And sometimes the strongest commitment is spoken in silence. Family and quiet moments. No one tells you this before you build a family in America, but silence changes shape when children arrive. It doesn't disappear. It becomes smaller, softer, and more meaningful. Family life taught me that silence isn't the opposite of love or connection. It's often the container that holds them together. And strangely, it was through these quiet family moments that my English became more natural than ever. Before children, silence felt personal, heavy. It pointed inward. After children, silence became shared, fragile, valuable. In an American household, there's a quiet agreement around family time. You don't talk just to talk. You listen. You observe. You wait. Words are important, but so is the space around them. When my child was born, I noticed something immediately. People spoke more softly around the baby. Fewer words. Slower pace. Longer pauses. And no one seemed uncomfortable with that. Silence wasn't awkward. It was protective. Like everyone understood that noise could overwhelm something still learning how to exist. That environment changed how I used English. I stopped trying to sound advanced. I started sounding clear. Short sentences. Simple words. Calm tone. Are you okay? Pause. I'm here. Pause. With children, language becomes less about impressing and more about anchoring. Silence gives those anchors weight. There's solid science behind this. Children learn language not from constant talking, but from responsive interaction, speech followed by silence, then response. That rhythm teaches meaning. Watching this happen in real time taught me something important. Adults learn the same way. We just forget it. Silence isn't a gap. It's part of the lesson. Family life in America also respects emotional quiet. When a child is upset, parents don't always rush to explain. They sit. They wait. They let feelings pass. I had grown up believing emotions needed immediate verbal attention. Here, I saw the opposite. Silence helped emotion settle. And once emotions settled, words became clearer. That lesson changed my English learning again. I stopped reacting emotionally to mistakes. I didn't apologize every time I paused. I didn't panic when I forgot a word. I waited. Silence gave me permission to recover without embarrassment. And people, especially family, gave me that time. At the dinner table, conversation wasn't constant. Some nights were quiet. Everyone tired. Everyone present. No pressure to entertain. That kind of silence felt new to me, but over time it felt safe. Family silence doesn't demand performance. It accepts presence. Raising children in a bilingual or immigrant household adds another layer. English becomes the shared ground, but silence becomes the bridge. When words fail, because a child is too young or emotions are too big, silence carries understanding. Eye contact. A touch. A pause. These moments taught me that communication is more than language. And that made my English less anxious. There were moments when my child asked a question I didn't know how to answer in English. My old instinct would have been to overtalk, to explain poorly. Instead, I learned to say, "Let me think." Silence. Then a simple answer. That pause modeled something important, not just language, but confidence. Silence showed that not knowing immediately is okay. Family routines reinforced this. Bedtime stories. Quiet reading. Soft voices. Pauses between pages. English spoken. Slowly, gently. In those moments, English stopped being a subject. It became a shared experience. And because silence surrounded it, the language stuck. There's also something humbling about family. Silence. Children don't judge pauses. They don't measure fluency. They care about tone and presence. That freed me. I spoke more naturally, less filtered. My English grew not because I studied harder, but because I used it without fear. Even conflict in family life carried this lesson. When tensions rose, silence appeared not as punishment, but as space. Space to breathe, to reset, to choose words carefully. Children watch this. They learn that silence can be kind. That lesson reinforced everything I had been learning about American culture and communication. One evening stands out. The house was quiet. Toys on the floor. Lights dim. No conversation. Just shared exhaustion. And in that silence, I felt something shift. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't lost in translation. I belonged. Silence had become a sign of connection, not distance. For English learners, this matters deeply. When you stop fearing silence, you stop rushing language. You stop treating English as something you must constantly prove. Family life teaches you that communication happens even when words rest. So if you're learning English while building a family or dreaming of one, pay attention to the quiet moments. They're not empty. They're doing important work. They're teaching patience, clarity, and emotional safety. All the things language needs to grow. In the end, family showed me that silence is not a lack of love. It's often love at its most stable. And when you learn English inside that kind of quiet, the language doesn't just improve, it settles in, like it was always meant to. Stay. Policies and daily life. At some point, I realized the silence in America wasn't just cultural or emotional. It was structural, built in, designed. You can feel it in daily routines, in public spaces, and especially in the way rules quietly guide behavior. Policies don't shout here. They whisper. And those whispers shape how people move, speak, and live, often without realizing it. When I first started navigating life in the US, I thought laws were just laws. Paperwork. Signs. Procedures. But over time, I noticed how deeply policy affects atmosphere. Traffic rules are clear and strictly followed. Cues are respected. Public spaces have invisible boundaries everyone seems to know. Because rules are predictable, people don't need to argue, negotiate, or raise their voices. Silence becomes the default. Think about driving. In many countries, sound fills the road, horns, engines, shouting. In America, roads are surprisingly quiet. People stop at red lights even when no one is watching. There's no need for noise to enforce order. Policy does that job silently. And that silence spills into daily life. This structure was comforting and unsettling. Comforting because things worked. Unsettling because there was no emotional release. No chaos to hide in. When systems function quietly, individual behavior becomes more visible. Your words matter more. Your tone matters more. Silence isn't background anymore. It's foreground. For an English learner, this environment is intense. You can't rely on noise to cover mistakes. You speak once. People listen. They don't interrupt. They don't talk over you. And when you finish, there's often a pause. Not because they didn't understand, but because that's the rhythm. Policy-trained rhythm. Speak. Pause. Respond. There's a concept in sociology called institutional trust. In societies with high trust in systems, people feel less need to assert themselves verbally. They trust the process. That trust creates quiet. In the US, many daily interactions are shaped by this trust. Forms replace arguments. Procedures replace negotiation. Silence replaces confrontation. At first, I misread this. I thought people were emotionally distant, cold, uninterested. But gradually, I saw something else. They weren't disengaged, they were regulated. Systems carried the weight so people didn't have to. This affected how I learned English more than any textbook. I had to be precise, clear, brief. Whether at a bank, a doctor's office, or a school meeting, words were functional. No storytelling. No emotional padding. Silence between sentences wasn't awkward, it was expected. That forced my English to mature fast. There's also a psychological effect here. When rules are clear, uncertainty decreases. And when uncertainty decreases, anxiety lowers. Silence feels safer. You don't need to constantly check social cues. You trust the structure. This makes listening easier. And better listening leads to better speaking. I remember my first time dealing with official paperwork. The room was quiet. People waited patiently. No complaints. No loud explanations. When it was my turn, I spoke. The clerk listened, typed, paused, asked a short question. Silence again. Everything moved calmly. My English didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be sufficient. That distinction changed everything. Policy-driven silence also shows up in schools. Classrooms are controlled. Students wait to speak. Teachers allow pauses. Silence is used intentionally for thinking, for reflection. This trains people from a young age to respect quiet processing time. When those students grow up, they carry that habit into conversations. Silence isn't emptiness. It's thinking time. For language learners, this environment can feel unforgiving. But it's actually supportive. You're given time. You're not rushed. You're not interrupted. The silence you experience isn't personal. It's procedural. Once I understood this, my frustration faded. I stopped filling silence with unnecessary words. I stopped apologizing for pauses. I trusted that if I spoke clearly and then waited, the system and the person would respond. And something surprising happened. People responded more positively. Conversations felt smoother. My English sounded more confident, not louder, but calmer. Policies also protect personal space. Noise ordinances, quiet hours, workplace norms, all reinforce the idea that silence is respectful. That respect extends to conversation. You don't dominate. You don't interrupt. You allow room. That room is silence. Understanding this helped me stop taking quiet personally. Silence wasn't rejection. It was structure, doing its job. So if you're learning English in America and wondering why everything feels so quiet, look beyond people. Look at the systems. They're designed to reduce friction. And when friction disappears, noise follows. In the end, American silence isn't accidental. It's engineered. And once you learn how to live inside it, how to speak clearly, then pause, you realize something powerful. Silence here isn't a lack of communication. It's proof that communication is working. A quiet turning point. That evening, after the long day was over, I sat alone by the window. The city lights were soft and far away. Cars moved slowly. People walked by, each carrying their own stories. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel rushed. I was not thinking about what I had to do next. I was not worried about tomorrow. I was simply present. I held a warm cup of tea in my hands. The steam rose gently into the air. I took a slow breath in, then a slow breath out. And in that quiet moment, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. I realized something important. All this time, I had been waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for confidence. Waiting for permission. Waiting to feel ready. But readiness never came. Instead, life kept moving forward. Days passed. Weeks passed. Years passed. And I was still standing at the same door, afraid to knock. I asked myself a simple question. What am I really afraid of? The answer surprised me. I was not afraid of failure. I was afraid of being seen. Seen trying. Seen learning. Seen making mistakes. I had spent so much time protecting myself from embarrassment that I had also protected myself from growth. That thought stayed with me. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was pale blue. The world felt quiet, as if it was giving me space. I decided to do one small thing differently. Just one. Instead of staying silent, I spoke. Not perfectly. Not confidently. But honestly. Later that day, when someone asked me a simple question in English, I did not look away. I did not pretend I didn't hear. I answered. My voice was soft. My grammar was not perfect. But my words were real. And something amazing happened. Nothing bad. No one laughed. No one judged. No one walked away. The conversation continued. It was short. It was simple. But it was enough. That moment stayed with me. All day, I realized that courage is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not feel powerful at first. Courage often feels like a quiet yes inside your chest. A yes that says, I will try. A yes that says, I am allowed to begin. A yes that says, this is enough for today. That evening I wrote in my notebook. I did not write big goals. I did not write long plans. I wrote one sentence. I will stop waiting to be perfect. Reading that sentence felt uncomfortable, but it also felt honest. Over the next few days, I practiced being a little braver. I spoke even when my sentences were slow. I listened even when I did not understand everything. I asked questions even when my accent showed. Each small action felt like placing a stone on a new path. The path was not clear yet, but it was real. One afternoon, I made a mistake while speaking. A clear mistake. I noticed it immediately. My face felt warm. My heart beat faster. In the past, I would have stopped talking. I would have apologized too much. I would have stayed quiet for the rest of the day. But this time I smiled. I corrected myself. Then I continued. That moment felt powerful. Not because I was perfect, but because I did not run away. I began to understand something deeper. Learning is not about avoiding mistakes. Learning is about staying when mistakes appear. Mistakes are not signs of weakness. They're signs of movement. If you are making mistakes, it means you are walking forward. One night, as I walked home, I noticed how different the world felt. The streets were the same. The buildings were the same. The noise was the same. But I was different. I was no longer carrying the heavy weight of expectation. I was carrying curiosity instead. I started to enjoy the process. I enjoyed recognizing words I had learned before. I enjoyed understanding one sentence more than yesterday. I enjoyed speaking without overthinking every sound. Progress did not come in big jumps. It came in quiet moments. Moments like understanding a joke. Moments like answering without translating in my head. Moments like feeling less afraid. I realized that confidence does not come before action. Confidence comes from action. It grows slowly. It grows quietly. And it grows when you show up again and again. That was the turning point. Not a big success. Not a dramatic change. Just a decision. A decision to stop hiding. A decision to be a learner. A decision to accept the pace of my own journey. As I went to sleep that night, I felt calm. I knew the road ahead would still have challenges. There would still be days of doubt. There would still be moments of frustration. But now I was moving. And that was enough. Learning to trust the process. After that quiet turning point, I thought everything would become easier. It didn't. The days that followed were not dramatic, but they were real. Some days felt light. Some days felt heavy. Some days, words came to me naturally. Other days, my mind felt slow and my tongue felt stiff. At first, this confused me. I asked myself, did I lose my progress? Am I going backward? But slowly, I began to understand something important. Progress is not a straight line. It moves forward, then pauses. It rises, then dips. And sometimes, it feels invisible. One morning, I woke up feeling tired. Not physically tired. Mentally tired. I did not feel excited to practice. I did not feel confident. I felt doubt creeping back in. The old voice returned. You are too slow. You should be better by now. Other people learn faster than you. For a moment, I believed it. I opened my notebook, stared at the page, and closed it again. Then I remembered something I had written before. I will stop waiting to be perfect. That sentence felt like a hand on my shoulder. So instead of pushing myself harder, I slowed down. I listened to English quietly while making breakfast. I did not force myself to understand every word. I let the sound flow. Later, I read a short paragraph. Only one. I read it. Slowly, out loud. My voice sounded calm. In that moment, I realized something new. Learning does not always require effort. Sometimes it requires patience. That day, I paid more attention to how I felt, not just what I produced. I noticed when my mind was open. I noticed when it was tired. And I learned to respect both. A few days later, I had a conversation that tested me. It was unexpected. I was not prepared. Someone spoke quickly. The words came fast, like a river after rain. I understood the general idea, but many details slipped past me. I felt that familiar pressure in my chest. The urge to smile and pretend I understood everything. But this time I chose honesty. I said, "Can you say that again, more slowly?" The words came out clearly. And something wonderful happened. The person slowed down. They repeated themselves. They waited. The conversation changed. It became calmer, more human. I realized that communication is not a performance. It is a connection. And connection grows when we allow ourselves to be honest about where we are. That experience stayed with me. I stopped seeing learning as a test I had to pass. I started seeing it as a relationship. I was building a relationship with a language, a relationship with myself. Some evenings, I practiced speaking alone. I talked about my day. I described what I saw outside the window. I spoke slowly, without rushing. Sometimes I repeated the same sentence 3 times. Not because I failed the first time, but because repetition felt comforting. It felt like walking the same path again, noticing new details each time. Other evenings, I did nothing. I rested. At first, resting felt wrong, like I was wasting time. But then I noticed something interesting. After rest, my mind felt clearer. My listening felt sharper. My speaking felt more natural. Rest was not the enemy of progress. Burnout was. One night, I read something that stayed with me. Consistency does not mean intensity. It means returning. Those words changed how I treated myself. If I practiced a little, it was enough. If I practiced imperfectly, it was enough. If I showed up tired, it was still enough. I stopped comparing my journey to others. Their path was not my path. Their pace was not my pace. And that was okay. Slowly, something shifted inside me again. Not fear this time. Trust. I began to trust the process. I trusted that listening, even without full understanding, was planting seeds. I trusted that speaking, even with mistakes, was building strength. I trusted that time and patience were working together. One afternoon, I noticed something small but meaningful. I understood a sentence without translating it. It happened naturally, quietly. I smiled to myself. Not because it was impressive, but because it was real. Later, I caught myself thinking in English for a moment. Just a moment. But it felt like a bridge forming. I realized that learning a language is not about adding something new. It is about creating space. Space for new sounds. Space for new patterns. Space for a new version of yourself. That idea stayed with me as I continued. I stopped asking, am I good enough? I started asking, am I continuing? And the answer, more often than not, was yes. As section 11 comes to a close, I can say this. I am no longer rushing toward an invisible finish line. I am walking. Some days slowly. Some days confidently. Some days with doubt. But always forward. And for the first time, I trust that this is exactly how learning is meant to feel. A gentle, happy ending. As I look back now, everything feels quieter. Not empty. Not lonely. Just calm. The noise that once lived in my head has softened. The pressure to hurry has faded. I no longer feel like I am chasing the language. It feels like the language is walking beside me. Some mornings, I sit by the window with a cup of tea. I listen to the world waking up. The sound of wind. The distant hum of cars. The gentle rhythm of daily life. In these moments, English no longer feels foreign. It feels familiar. I speak it slowly. I listen without fear. I read with curiosity, not urgency. I have learned something important on this journey. Learning does not need to be loud. It does not need struggle or stress to be real. Sometimes, the most meaningful growth happens quietly. There was a time when I believed fluency meant perfection. No pauses. No mistakes. No hesitation. Now I know better. Fluency is comfort. It is the ability to stay present, even when words are missing. It is the courage to continue speaking, even when sentences are imperfect. Fluency is trusting yourself. I still make mistakes. I still search for words. I still ask people to repeat themselves. But these moments no longer embarrass me. They connect me. When I ask someone to slow down, they often smile. When I make a mistake, conversations continue. Life moves on. And I move with it. One afternoon, I realized something simple and beautiful. I was no longer thinking about my English. I was thinking about ideas. About feelings. About stories. Language had become a bridge, not a barrier. That realization felt like coming home. I thought about the person I was when this journey began. Anxious. Quiet. Afraid of silence. I thought silence meant failure. Now, silence feels different. Silence is space. Space to listen. Space to reflect. Space to grow. In America, I learned that silence does not mean distance. Sometimes it means respect. Sometimes it means care. And sometimes it simply means peace. The quiet moments I once feared became my teachers. They taught me patience. They taught me awareness. They taught me how to hear not only words, but meaning. I learned to notice small changes. How my listening became sharper. How my pronunciation became softer, more natural. How my confidence grew without announcing itself. I stopped waiting for a big moment of success. There was no single day when I woke up fluent. Instead, there were hundreds of small moments. A sentence understood without translation. A conversation that flowed easily. A smile shared across cultures. These moments added up. Slowly. Quietly. And that was enough. If you are listening to this now, maybe you are on a similar path. Maybe you feel slow. Maybe you feel stuck. Maybe you feel unsure. Let me tell you something I wish I had known earlier. You're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be. Your pace is your strength. Every time you listen, you are training your ear. Every time you read, you are building familiarity. Every time you speak, you are building courage. Even when it feels small. Especially when it feels small. Do not rush past your own progress. Do not measure yourself by someone else's journey. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And your silence matters too. Because in silence, understanding grows. As this story comes to an end, I want to leave you with one gentle thought. Learning a language is not about becoming someone else. It is about becoming more yourself. A version of you that can connect with more people. A version of you that can understand more of the world. And that version grows. Best with patience. So take your time. Speak slowly. Listen deeply. Rest when you need to. The language will wait for you. It always does. This is not the end of the journey. It is simply a peaceful pause. A place to breathe. A place to smile. And when you are ready, you will continue. One quiet step at a time. Before you leave this video, I want you to pause for just a moment. Not to study. Not to repeat. Just to breathe. If you are still here, it means something inside you is listening. Not only to English, but to yourself. Maybe you started this video feeling tired. Maybe you felt behind. Maybe you wondered if learning English slowly still counts. Let me say this clearly. It does. Every quiet minute you spend listening matters. Every sentence you understand without pressure matters. Every moment you stay instead of quitting matters. You are not weak for learning slowly. You are building something deep. And deep things last. If this story felt familiar, if the silence in this video felt comforting, then this channel is for you. Here, we learn English the human way. Through real life. Through emotion. Through stories that breathe. No rushing. No shouting. No pretending. Just slow English. Real listening. And quiet confidence. If you want more videos like this, stories that train your ears like a native. Stories that help you listen, read, and speak with calm. Then stay with me. Subscribe to this channel. Save this video. Share it with someone who is learning quietly, just like you. And remember this. You don't need to be louder to be fluent. You don't need to be faster to be strong. Sometimes, the quietest learners go the furthest. Thank you for listening. That's all for today. I'll make more videos like this in the future. Please subscribe to watch them.